Hi, this is Sergeant Betsy Brantner Smith with the National Police Association, and this is the National Police Association podcast. I have a fantastic guest with me today. I'm already going to tell you, I don't have enough time with this guy. I'm going to have to get him back already. But he, of course, he was in law enforcement, but his background and his experience and his service to this nation is just extraordinary. So I knew you had to meet him. Rich Staropoli, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Betsy. You certainly appreciate the kind words.
So we were on another podcast together, and you do a lot of media like I do, but I'm going to start by asking you what I ask every single cop I have on. Why'd you become a cop?
Well, I'll tell you, Betsy, I did not have the typical career track to becoming a cop, right? I grew up in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. My father was an Italian immigrant. He was a barber, right? His education, formal education, went as far as the seventh grade. And that was common throughout all the parents, in the neighborhood. Most of the guys that I grew up with became cops, firemen, sanitation workers, so on and so forth. But the big thing about my dad was, hey, I want you to go to college. So I went to college. I went to NYU, Tandon School of Engineering. I have 2 degrees in mechanical and aerospace engineering. And while I was there, and you may realize this, but NYU is the most expensive college in the United States right now. And while I was there, at the end of my freshman year, unbeknownst to all of us that were enrolled there, NYU sends out the proverbial letter in the mail and doubles the price of tuition, which creates a huge problem when dad is a barber giving haircuts, for $4 at a clip, and minimum wage is $3.35 an hour. So I needed more than that, and I needed that pretty quickly. And back in those days, back in the mid 80s, the CIA would recruit on college campuses. Not the Culinary Institute of America, but the Central Intelligence Agency, right? The real three-letter agency. So I landed there for a short amount of time in the science and technology division, doing things that ultimately would have had to do with my educational, background in engineering. It was exciting, but not the level of excitement that I was looking for. Because, like I said, I had friends that were cops, emergency services cops, SWAT operators, U.S. Marshals, so on and so forth. So I wanted something a little bit more. And somebody suggested to me, why don't you take a look at federal law enforcement, FBI or the Secret Service? So I applied to the Secret Service. After about a year's worth of applications, interviews, and a really intense background investigation, I landed a position as a Secret Service agent assigned to the New York field office, which is still the busiest office the Secret Service has, surrounded by just an unbelievable group of real warriors. Back then the Secret Service only had about 1,000 agents. Less than 10% were women. And 90% of these guys had come out of the military. I had never been in the military. So I got a real good schooling under their tutelage really quickly. I wasn't married at the time. I was 22 years old. So I volunteered for every assignment that came up. I was all over the world real quickly. And I just got to do some unbelievable things that probably somebody that's, not even 25 years old yet should be doing. And loved every minute of it.
I know, don't you? I think about that. I was a 21-year-old farm girl 2 weeks out of college when they gave me a badge and a gun. And I always think about that. But you're right. When you're that young and you're that excited about the job and you volunteer for things, I mean, you get to do a lot of cool stuff. That's why I wish more kids, and this is something, of course, we're all working on. I wish more kids were interested in the profession today, because you never have the same day twice, right?
No, no matter what agency or department you go to, anywhere in the world for that matter, being a first responder, frontline law enforcement in particular, you really do have an e-ticket to the greatest show on earth. And usually you're right in the middle of this. And these are things, people ask me all the time, why don't you put pencil to paper and put a book together? I said, I don't think I could do justice to some of the things I've seen and heard. It's just unbelievable. You talk about getting a gun and a badge. My first day there, when I walked into the office, which is very corporate, everybody's in their suits and ties, unless you got 25 years on, then you can wear whatever you want. The agent in charge handed me a letter that said, you're now a Secret Service agent, handed me a pair of handcuffs and a gun. I got a Ruger 357 Magnum that looked like somebody was beat to death with it in 1950. And it was, kind of rusting. The bluing was gone. And I'm like, okay, what do I do with this? This was before I even went to any training. He goes, we'll get you trained up, kid. Don't worry about it. This is back when guys were still wearing fedoras and Ray-Bans, which is how you could tell the old guys, right? I still wear my Ray-Ban Wayfarers. The new guys wear those fancy Oakleys, right? Just not for me.
Now, a lot of people don't realize the level of tactical training that the Secret Service goes through. I mean, there's, how many federal agencies are there? Police agencies, 80 some, right? But not everybody goes to the same level of training. Talk about that for a minute. Just the level of scenario-based training, tactical training that the Secret Service goes through and always had, even before that was something we were doing nationwide in law enforcement.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, the Secret Service doesn't screw around when it comes to marksmanship, your shooting capabilities, and your tactical training, right? Even though the Secret Service was formed for the purposes of, investigating these counterfeiting rings that had permeated, the Union and Confederacy during the Civil War, eventually the Secret Service picks up presidential protection as we know it today, following the assassinations of 3 sitting U.S. presidents, with the final one in 1901 and, of course, the Kennedy assassination in 63. It's that responsibility, the protective responsibility, that forces the Secret Service to make sure that the scenario-based training, all the exercises that you go through before you get assigned permanently to a field office is just hammered home into your head. And with such a small agency, like I said, when I started, there were only about 1,000 people. They keep a really close eye on what you're doing. There was no hiding in the Secret Service, certainly when you're at the range and you're shooting or training. As a matter of fact, when you go to the range, it may be a 12-point range. Each agent's got at least 2 firearms instructors on top of you. So if you're doing anything wrong, they're going to correct that. So by the time you're done shooting and learning all the scenarios and what your responsibilities are, protective responsibilities, you're good to go. They've signed off, or real quickly, people will know that you're not that good to go, and maybe you should seek employment elsewhere, right? Your reputation is everything in such a small agency. I also had the ability, when I was eventually reassigned after about a dozen years to the Presidential Protective Division, I became a counter-assault team operator. All of those guys are trained by former military special operations forces, right? We spend a lot of time at places like Fort Bragg, a lot of times at Fort Meade. As a matter of fact, the obstacle course that you run during that training is the first one I've ever seen that has a turn in it. So after you finish your miles worth of obstacles, you think you're done. You're not done, because look to your left, there's a whole other obstacle course now you've got to get through. So you never knew what they were going to throw at you. It's gotten a little bit watered down now over the years with what they're willing to let slide, because the agency, as many agencies have expanded so much. Maybe there's more of an emphasis on optics, and some of the woke philosophies have infiltrated some of these agencies and organizations, which is taken away from the level of requirement that you needed to meet to successfully complete the training. But it's still, training is still of paramount importance to the Secret Service.
Well, all of America has witnessed what DEI policies have done to the Secret Service. I mean, there's just no getting around that. Woke doesn't work in law enforcement, especially not in the Secret Service. When you got assigned to the presidential detail, who was the president?
Clinton.
Okay, so what is that like, to literally walk in there and know that you're about to spend your days now and nights witnessing history?
Yeah, it's pretty intense. When you get reassigned to Washington, they give you what's known as the White House pass. It's got your picture on it. It doesn't say Secret Service, but it's got a little color-coded indicator that you're armed and you're with the Secret Service. That pass is the keys to the entire White House. There isn't a place you can't go. As a matter of fact, as somebody that's newly reassigned to the president's detail, you're encouraged to wander the White House. So I've been through the entire White House, the tunnel system, the Oval Office, you name it. Because you need to have that familiarity in the event something happens, which skip ahead to 2001. It's that familiarity that the guys that were assigned to the president's detail relied upon, because if you recall, Vice President Cheney happened to be in his office across the street at the old executive office building, and the guys assigned to the vice president's detail didn't have that routine familiarity with the White House complex. And fortunately, there were a number of agents on the White House complex from the president's detail, even though President Bush happened to be in Florida at the time. But it's a pretty overwhelming experience. I never took it for granted. Every day I walked in there, and look, you had some early mornings and some real late nights, but you never take for granted, where you are and the gravity of what went on in that building, over the course of the last, 250 years now. It's just an incredible place to work.
One of the things I've always marveled at is the integrity of Secret Service agents long after they leave the agency. They don't tell tales out of school for the most part. And what is it that they do to you guys or tell you guys, or what do you have to swear that, to your grave, there are secrets that you will take?
The motto of the Secret Service is worthy of trust and confidence. Yeah, I don't think about that too often. I certainly wasn't really thinking about it, as a new agent, but that's something that's just ingrained in your mind and you don't even think about it, but you've got to live up to that expectation, right? I don't write books. As a whole, the Secret Service doesn't write books. I think we were put to the test during the early Clinton years when you had that whole Monica Lewinsky incident, where guys that were working the shift, and I was one of them, we were told, you're going to appear before Congress and you're going to testify about everything you heard and you saw. Not going to do it. That's not what we do. If you want me to testify, you're gonna have to send me to jail. And that's what it came down to. And in the end, only one guy was forced to testify. That was the agent in charge. And he said, yeah, I was working. I was there. I have nothing to add. And that was it. So we, as a whole, take that seriously. I certainly took it very seriously. There are things that you see and hear. Think about if I showed up in your home and stayed with you for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I don't talk about any arguments or any discussions you have with any family members or any comments that you make or what you're watching on TV. That's not what I'm there to do. And that was the standard that I tried to live up to. And I always thought, down the road, hey, if I say anything about what I've heard, how can anyone ever trust me again? Right? Because once you do that, once you let the cat out of the bag, you give the public insight into what you're seeing and hearing. I mean, short of something really illegal, your integrity has been so compromised. There's no coming back from that. Now, maybe it's a different story with what we've seen the last 4 years, right?
Right.
That's a whole other, historic time. But that's a whole topic for a whole, 3-hour show if you want to do that.
That'll be our second show we do together. Speaking of historic times, you and I were both on the job on 9/11/01, and I know you and I and all our peers, we remember exactly where we were, what we were doing, all of that. America seems to really have forgotten about that. But talk about your life after 9/11/01 with the Secret Service.
Well, it's interesting about you hit it right on the head. For something so recent and so cataclysmic, right? It affected not just the United States, certainly not just New York or Shanksville, PA, right, or the Pentagon. This is international implications that we still deal with today, which is why we're blowing up nuclear facilities in Iran, right? 25 years later. Unfortunately, this isn't taught in school. Nobody talks about this. But whenever I have friends of mine, particularly in law enforcement, they come to New York or New Jersey, where I am now, I always throw them in a car and go, let's take a ride. And I take them through Brooklyn, where I grew up. Every other street in Brooklyn is renamed for somebody that was killed in the World Trade Center. Maybe not on September 11th, but people are still dying from the repercussions of stuff that was blowing through the air that they've breathed in over the course of, a decade's worth of recovery effort. And people don't realize that. It's crazy that this thing is not taught about in schools and isn't heralded much more often than you see, once a year on the morning of September 11th. But on September 11th, if you recall, the middle of September is when the United Nations meets in New York. I was assigned to the president's detail, and I happened to stop at the White House to get some last-minute instructions, and I couldn't find a place to park. So one of the uniform division guys said, hey, the president's in Florida. Why don't you just park inside the White House grounds? The first and only time I'm allowed access to park in the White House grounds was on September 11th. And my car, this little red Ford Focus ended up being the only car. Thankfully, people knew that that was my car, that the bomb squad didn't tow out of there and, you know, blow up because they couldn't figure out whose car it was. But that was my introduction to the events of September 11th, when somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, I know you're going to New York. Are you aware of what's going on?" I had no idea what was going on. And then, you know, I was with the counter assault team at the time. So here I am on the White House grounds, dressed all in black. I've got my, you know, my M4 in my bag. I've got a 357 Magnum in a drop holster. You didn't see cops dressed like that, you know, prior to September 11th. Now I've got another problem. Nobody knows who the hell I am. I'm supposed to be in New York. I'm standing outside the White House gates with this automatic weapon because we don't know what's coming at us or what's going on. And the only instruction I've got is stand by. You know, we've got to get a helicopter to you and grab the first 5 CAT guys, counter assault guys you can. We're going to fly you to wherever the president is. So that's what we did for the next 2 days. We were just waiting to see where we were going to go meet the president. And eventually he came back to the White House, and then we ended up in the undisclosed locations for the next couple of days. And that's how the day unfolded for me, or the next few days.
And then, you know, fast forward to now 25 years later, you know, because back then one of the things I keep saying now is we all need to have a 9/12/01 mindset, right, when it comes to terrorism and foreign entities and things. Fast forward 25 years from that day and what you experienced. What are your thoughts now when you think we've had the FBI director, you know, for the last couple of years testifying that, you know, terror attacks are imminent. We've got unknown number of people who hate this country have been allowed to come here. Some we know, some we don't. What do you think? Because it seems so mind-boggling and almost insurmountable to me in how we address this.
Well, you know, what's interesting is we've got a lot of people who just hate this country that managed to get in here, but we've got a lot of people that hate this country that managed to get elected to some pretty senior positions in the U.S. government, to include, you know, this last administration, the Biden crime family, as I like to refer to them. We have never been, I think, in a better posture or more poised for a repeat of what occurred on September 11th and in the events leading up to September 11th than ever before, right? And so for law enforcement that's out there, hey, when somebody walks up to you and says to you, hey, there's a backpack sitting on the curb, you can't just walk up to it and kick it. It's probably nothing. It might be closed. You've got to take that with the level of seriousness that everyone was taking things on September 12th, right? We are positioned right now where, first of all, the world hates the guy that we've got running the show right now, President Trump, right? They don't like the fact that we've got Pete Hegseth running around at the Department of Defense. And I could go on and on about Kristi Noem and so
Cash Patel,
Cash Patel, Danny Bongino, all the rest of them, right? All of these people are pretty high on the priority list targets. But if they can't get to those people, the collateral damage that will ensue when something happens to the civilian populace will rival what you saw on September 11th. This was not just a New York incident, a Shanksville, PA incident, or a DC incident. It's got nationwide, if not international, ranging effects. There are so many prime targets out there that, you know, to even start to consider what would be hit first is impossible. But the situation that's presented itself right now, because we've got 25 million illegal aliens that are in here that will do anything to keep from getting deported. We've got Iranian terror cells that have been running around the United States, by the way, since 1979. People forget that. Those guys walked into a U.S. embassy and took 50 of our guys hostage and wouldn't give them back for 2 years, and only gave them back because of peace through strength, because a guy named Ronald Reagan had just been elected president and told the Iranians, if you don't release those American hostages, I'm going to bomb you back into the Stone Age. And they knew he meant it, which is the same situation we've got with President Donald J. Trump. But the short answer to your question is, listen, we are setting ourselves up. We have set ourselves up for things to happen again and unfold that will make the events of September 11th pale in comparison to what you saw.
You know, and we tell people, if you see something, say something, all of that. And, you know, one of the many issues with that is American law enforcement, state, local, and even federal are so short staffed right now, especially, our big blue cities, big blue counties. I mean, look at, LA, Chicago, thousands of officers short. Uh, that's a crisis, right?
That is a huge crisis. And we're seeing that, all over the country. I think New York is down about 8,000 cops. Uh, so part of the problem with that is if you just want to get numbers up, well, go ahead and have a job fair and just start hiring people. And then you end up with people that just can't do the job, right? Law enforcement, firefighting, emergency medical, that's not the job for everyone. You could look fantastic on paper, but this is not the job for you, right? For everyone that's out there. You can't just have cookie cutter approach to hiring people just to get those numbers up. And that's a huge problem that these municipalities have to deal with.
And you also can't hire people because of their sex or their color of their skin or their sexual orientation or any of that. We've got to go back to hiring people because they are qualified, because they are able, and because they have a passion for this job, right?
You really do need to have a passion for this job, and I say this not just for law enforcement, for all first responders, right? There's got to be something that motivates you and drives you to want to insert yourself into someone else's problems or to insert yourself into a situation where most people are just going to walk by or swarm the situation so they can video it with their iPhones, right? There's always someone that steps up and says, hey, I got this. That's the person that we want as a first responder, certainly as the person we want for law enforcement. One thing I used to say is when I was at the Secret Service, I had about a dozen years on before I was accepted to go to counter assault school. With that much time on, you kind of thought maybe there'd be a little bit of respect for the fact that I had spent a dozen years in New York. They don't care who you are. You start as if you were some 17-year-old, recruit that's never done a damn thing. And there's a mechanism, there's a reason to doing that. If you can't meet the standards to become a counter assault guy, that's it. There's no embarrassment. That's just a fact. They're not going to lower the level of standard to suit you because of who you think you are or what you've done. You've got to raise yourself to the bar to meet those standards because there's people that are going to depend on you when things go bad really quickly. And law enforcement needs to get back to that mentality. Just to hire people because we need to have optics. We need to fill a DEI role. I know I hear a lot about this, 30 for 30. We need 30% of women. Listen, why aren't people like yourself going out and recruiting people, right? People that have proven they've got a track record. They can do the job. They've got the right mentality, right, to do this. That's who I want recruiting people. I used to say to guys that work for me, hey, we hired you. Before we allow you to actually become a Secret Service agent, you're going to bring me 2 or 3 other people that I can hire as well. Because my feeling was if this guy's head is in the game, he can bring me people who will meet that standard because no one wants to surround themselves. No one wants to be embarrassed by recommending someone that can't do the job. But unfortunately, the Secret Service, because it still is a pretty small agency, although it's tripled in size since I've been there, has a history of in-depth nepotism. It's become more of, hey, how did you get this job? Whose mom or dad, were you? Who recommended you? That needs to go back to where it was when I started. That was one of the first questions you were asked. Who are you? How'd you find out about this job? Because that gives me a lot of insight into where your head's at should you make it through the process and eventually get hired. That's a long-winded answer to your question.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear. And I get asked about that 30 by 30 initiative all the time, 30% women in law enforcement by 2030. And I detest it. It would be great, I guess, if we had 30. It'd be great if we had 50% of women in law enforcement to represent the population, but you can't hire people just because of their sex. And having been a cop for 29 years, I can tell you, and I ran my recruitment team and I was very involved in all of that, but not everybody's interested in this career. And so we just got to hire people who want to do it. I don't care about their sex. I don't care about their color, but we can't damage this profession just for DEI, for woke policies. And again, we saw this exploded on the international scene in Butler, Pennsylvania last year. And I don't want you to tell tales out of school, but I have to ask you, why don't we know more about what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania when President Trump got shot?
Well, two things I'll say. If you take a look at this background I've got, dropped in behind me, I didn't pick that randomly to make myself look better. It would take a lot more than that. But that blue line that's there, you'll notice it doesn't say anything about women. It doesn't say anything about color. It's blue. That's all I'm looking for to start when I'm interviewing somebody to become, a cop. I don't care about any others. I can teach the other stuff. I don't care if you've got any experience, but it's that blue and the motivation behind that is what I'm looking for to do this job. The other thing is, why aren't we recruiting from military installations? You've got plenty of veterans that have done 11 tours, 12 tours. Talk about experience. Get me some of those folks. And, you have a problem recruiting women. Hey, I don't know what a staff sergeant makes in the military, but I can certainly tell you as a cop or as a federal agent, I can triple your salary overnight, right? Easily. So I think there's huge opportunity there that just isn't used as effectively as it should be. Why don't we know anything more about what happened in Butler? Listen, there's no doubt. I don't want to use the word conspiracy because people right away will start thinking about, well, Rich, are you saying like the Easter Bunny and the abominable snowman were involved in the shooting of? No, that's not what I'm saying. The level of collusion that went on between the senior leadership at the Secret Service, the FBI, the Attorney General's office, and the Biden crime family corrupt administration cannot be underestimated. There is no way meetings took place at the senior levels of the Secret Service with the 12 or 13 assistant directors, the deputy director, and the director, and they just, decided there's no real threat level against former President Trump. Let's turn off all the Secret Service assets independently. That had to be directed by Mayorkas at DHS, that crypt keeper of an attorney general that we had, and the White House themselves. Because all the assets that normally somebody of former President Trump's status would have gotten, look, the guy was target number one on the Iranian hit list. Target number two was Mike Pompeo. I know that for a fact because Mike Pompeo is not only a friend, he happens to be a board member at my company. So he shows up with a detail from State Department that's 3 times the size of what was afforded former President Trump. I've also had a number of conversations with some of the Trump family. So I know for a fact that Butler was the one and only time in a year and a half where the Secret Service provided counter sniper support to former President Trump. And I purposely say former President Trump because that's what the Secret Service was banking on. They treated President Trump like he was a routine former, like he was Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford, or even President Bush. There's no way they did that independently. So to answer your question, why do we know so little about the investigation? The reason is because so little investigation was done. Nothing was done. The FBI said they went out and interviewed 1,000 people. Let me see those reports. Why did they all say so-and-so was interviewed? He had nothing to say. Are you kidding me? You didn't interview anyone. You disposed of that body after that guy's head was exploded like a pumpkin on that very flat rooftop, by the way, which was within handgun reach of the president. Nobody had an issue with that. You were more concerned about the optics. You had a shift of 6 Secret Service agents. What is the probability, the statistical probability, if I randomly pick 6 Secret Service agents, 50% of them, 3 of them would be female? That just wouldn't happen. So somebody stepped in and said, no, get rid of the guys. I want 3 women in there. And the women that they picked, they weren't even close to the task of fulfilling the mission of the Secret Service. Did anyone listening to this have any confidence in the ability of the Secret Service to provide adequate protection to President Trump after seeing what went on in Butler and then repeated itself almost on that golf course in Florida? It is a travesty of what they've turned the Secret Service into. I'm almost embarrassed to tell people anymore that I was a Secret Service agent.
Well, I tell you, I do believe that, the agency is going to come back. I think we're really on the right track. I think federal law enforcement in general is on the right track, but it's going to take some time. It's going to take some hard work, and it's going to take some healing for people to get our confidence back. Rich, I'm going to have you back. But but we got to go in a minute here. Tell folks where they can find you, find, your social media, what you're doing now, all of that.
Listen, with the last name that I've got, I'm not too hard to find. You can find me on LinkedIn if you want to reach out. Every now and then I will post something, like I'll post this on my Twitter account. I pop up on Fox News, pretty regularly, so I'm not that hard to find. My day job, my name of my company is Rivada Space Networks, and we build satellite communication, so you can always reach me through there as well.
Rich, I'm telling you, I am so glad we got to have this conversation, and I thank you so much for spending time with us today. And if you'd like more information about the National Police Association, you can visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Every day, the brave men and women of law enforcement put their lives on the line to keep us safe. But they need our help to continue their mission. Activist politicians, progressive prosecutors, the ACLU, and the rest of the anti-police forces receive millions in donations from extremist pro-criminal elements like George Soros and woke corporations. The National Police Association is fighting them in courts around the country, including the United States Supreme Court, defending officers who are being attacked for doing their jobs. Additionally, the National Police Association works year-round to pass tough-on-crime legislation to put and keep criminals behind bars. Consider going to nationalpolice.org and donating to keep us in the fight. Together we can win. That is nationalpolice.org.